Harlem, New York. 9:18 p.m. Thursday, November 2nd, 1961. The wind cutting down from the Hudson carries the bite of winter and the smell of coal smoke from tenement chimneys. On Lenox Avenue, streetlights buzz and flicker, casting long shadows across cracked sidewalks still wet from an afternoon rain. Inside Wells' restaurant, the air hangs thick with the scent of fried catfish, collard greens, and the cheap cigars that working men smoke when payday stretches thin. At the corner booth, beneath a amber light that's seen better decades, sits Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. Gray wool suit, pressed sharp as a blade. Black tie, knotted with military precision. His fedora rests on the red vinyl seat beside him, never on his head inside a Harlem establishment. His coffee has gone cold twice, but his eyes remain fixed on the door with the patience of a man who built an empire on reading people's intentions before they knew them themselves. At 9:21 p.m., Leon Shine Pettigrew steps through that door. 23 years of loyalty. 23 years of collecting envelopes, settling disputes, and carrying messages that could end bloodlines. Shine wears a cream sharkskin suit that cost more than most Harlem families see in 6 months. Italian leather shoes that click against the worn linoleum with each step. Gold watch that catches the light when he adjusts his cuffs, the kind of flash that draws attention, and in Bumpy's world, attention is the first symptom of a fatal disease. The restaurant quiets. Conversations pause mid-sentence. Forks freeze halfway to mouths. Everyone in Wells knows the unspoken rule: when Bumpy Johnson is silent, something is about to be decided. Shine slides into the booth, leather squeaking under his weight. His cologne is expensive and loud. His smile is rehearsed. His hands shake just enough to rattle the ice in his glass when he reaches for it. Between them sits a manila envelope. Thick. Heavy. Not as heavy as it should be. For 18 months, while Bumpy focused on expanding operations into Brooklyn, Shine has been skimming. Not just loose change from collections, but systematic theft. Redirecting shipments. Inflating expenses. Keeping 2 sets of books. The kind of betrayal that requires planning, patience, and the arrogance to believe you're smarter than the man who taught you everything you know about survival. But tonight isn't about the money. Tonight is about the words Shine carried back to this table. Words delivered to him 3 hours ago by Vincent Vinny Ice Carboni, the Italian capo who's been courting Bumpy's lieutenants with promises of real structure and professional management. Words that no black man should ever repeat about another black man. Especially not in Harlem, especially not about Bumpy Johnson. Shine opens his mouth and delivers Vinny's message verbatim. He says, "You're finished, Bump." Says Harlem needs real leadership now, not some. He hesitates, then finishes with the racial slur that Vinny insisted he repeat. Says, "You're just a caretaker they outgrew." The silence that follows is surgical, precise. The kind of quiet that precedes violence so systematic it becomes art. Bumpy doesn't raise his voice. Doesn't lean forward. Doesn't even blink. "You repeated that," he says, voice flat as winter concrete. "In my neighborhood. At my table." It's not a question. It's a verdict. What Shine doesn't know is that in 47 minutes, he'll receive instructions for a private meeting. A warehouse near the Harlem River. Come alone. Bring everything you stole. That meeting will have no witnesses, no police reports, and no survivors willing to talk. Because some betrayals are so complete, so venomous, that they require consequences measured not in broken bones or bullets, but in complete erasure. The story of how Leon Shine Pettigrew lost everything is a warning that history has tried to hide. If you enjoy these deep dives into the underworld, you can support the channel by buying me a coffee using the link in the description. Your support keeps these investigations alive. Now, let's go back to January 1961, when the first crack in Shine's loyalty began to show. January 1961. 6:15 a.m. Harlem operates like precision machinery, each gear turning on schedule before the sun fully breaks the horizon. The numbers runners are already moving building to building. Policy slips tucked in coat pockets, following routes mapped with military exactness. Protection payments flow from 147 businesses between 110th and 155th Streets, each envelope reaching designated hands at predetermined times. Dock workers report shipment arrivals. Street captains confirm overnight collections. Police patrol schedules are tracked by badge number and habit. This isn't the chaotic scramble of desperate criminals fighting over corners. This is empire, built on discipline, maintained through respect, enforced with consequences so systematic they've become neighborhood legend. At the center of this machine sits Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, and for 23 years the man ensuring every gear turned without grinding has been Leon Shine Pettigrew. Shine's loyalty wasn't bought. It was forged in blood and gratitude on a summer night in 1938. 17-year-old Leon had stolen $40 from Dutch Schultz's numbers operation, a mistake that carried a death sentence in Depression-era Harlem. They cornered him in an alley off 132nd Street, 3 men with guns drawn, execution guaranteed. Bumpy intervened not from sentiment but calculation. He saw intelligence in the terrified teenager, the kind of survival instinct that had kept him undetected for 6 months. Bumpy paid Schultz the debt plus interest, then offered Leon a choice: work for free until the theft was repaid through labor, or disappear into whatever hole the streets provided. Leon chose survival and became Shine, earning the nickname through his ability to make problems disappear until they gleamed with resolution. Shine's rise through the organization followed mathematical progression. Numbers runner became courier. Courier became problem solver. When Bumpy served federal sentences, Shine managed Harlem operations with mechanical efficiency, never overstepping, never freelancing, always waiting for coded instructions from trusted intermediaries. During the Italian mob wars of the mid-1950s, when Genovese and Luciano families tried carving Harlem into territories, Shine coordinated resistance that cost the Italians more money than they could justify spending. He wasn't flashy. He didn't seek recognition. He executed orders with the devotion of a man who understood that Bumpy Johnson had transformed his death sentence into a life worth living. But January 1961 marked the beginning of a shift, so subtle even Shine didn't recognize it as compromise. Her name was Carmen Delacroix, and she sang at downtown nightclubs with a voice that made men forget their wives and their limitations. She wore imported silk and spoke with the confidence of a woman who understood that beauty was currency in a world that traded in power. She mentioned casually that she'd always admired mink, the kind of statement that sounded like observation but functioned as invitation. Shine, who had spent 23 years living modestly despite access to significant money, found himself calculating what it would cost to impress a woman who moved between worlds he could only observe from distance. On January 15th, Shine took $2,800 from the weekly collection before it reached Bumpy's count. He told himself it was a loan, something he'd replace from his own earnings over the next few months. He bought Carmen the mink stole from a Fifth Avenue furrier, paying cash, using a false name. What Shine didn't know was that Bumpy noticed the stole when Carmen wore it to the Palm Cafe 3 days later. Bumpy said nothing, asked no questions, simply watched with the patience of a man who built an empire by understanding that small cracks always precede complete structural failure. He began documenting patterns, noting dates, amounts, behavioral changes. On January 28th, Bumpy called Shine into his office and presented what appeared to be the opportunity of a lifetime, a heroin distribution network expansion worth $500,000 in potential monthly revenue, complete operational control, percentage points that could make Shine wealthy beyond imagination. Shine accepted with enthusiasm that sounded like loyalty, but carried the faint scent of desperation. What he didn't understand was that this wasn't opportunity. This was examination. Bumpy Johnson was giving his most trusted lieutenant enough rope to either secure the empire or fashion his own noose. February 1961 turns Harlem into a mirror with two faces, and Leon Shine Pettigrew learns how to live in both reflections simultaneously. By day, he remains the disciplined Lieutenant Bumpy Johnson, molded over 23 years, arriving at the 116th Street office by 7 each morning, reviewing collection reports with the meticulous attention of a man who understands that empire requires precision in every detail. He walks familiar routes, settles disputes with measured authority, and delivers envelopes with the same calm efficiency that has made him indispensable. His reports remain punctual, his numbers align with expectations, and he still calls Bumpy Mr. Johnson in private, maintaining the code that separates respect from performance. But when darkness falls over Harlem, a second man emerges from the same body. The modest apartment gives way to late nights at Carmen Delacroix's place, then to something far more dangerous. By mid-February, Shine has moved Carmen into an $8,500 Sugar Hill apartment, a sum that represents more than 3 years of legitimate earnings, but feels justified by the expanding heroin operations potential. Custom suits begin arriving from an Italian tailor on Mulberry Street, shark-skin fabric that whispers against skin with each movement, costing more than most Harlem families see in 6 months. He starts gambling at exclusive clubs where the minimum bet equals a week's wages for a factory worker, dropping hundreds rather than the careful dollars of his past. The thefts themselves evolve from desperate improvisation into systematic operation, each method refined through repetition until stealing feels like legitimate business practice. Shine begins by redirecting small percentages from numbers games, skimming 2% here, 3% there, amounts small enough to attribute to natural variance in gambling outcomes. He instructs runners to write certain bets in modified code, making them appear as losses on surface ledgers, while true totals move into side books he alone controls. Protection costs get inflated for nervous business owners, with Shine charging them 20% more while reporting standard rates to Bumpy's accountants. The difference never crosses official books, vanishing instead into the parallel economy Shine constructs around his legitimate duties. When the heroin expansion begins moving serious product, Shine refines his approach with mathematical precision. Shipments arrive with exact weights, but he manipulates documentation with surgical care. A kilogram becomes 900 grams on paper, the missing 100 grams disappearing into a separate distribution line that feeds directly into his growing wealth. He tells himself it's temporary, a cushion, insurance against an uncertain future. In reality, each successful deception lowers his fear and raises his ambition, creating an addiction to theft that mirrors the product he's stealing. March 8th brings the inevitable consequence of visible wealth in a world where visibility equals vulnerability. Carmen mentions casually that friends from her downtown singing engagements know people interested in Harlem business opportunities. Perhaps Shine would join them for drinks at a midtown establishment where such conversations happen naturally. The friends turn out to be connected to Vincent Vinny Ice Carbone, a Genovese capo with manicured hands and predator's eyes, who speaks to Shine as an equal, calling him partner and discussing modernization of Harlem operations. Carbone doesn't threaten. He compliments, suggesting that a man of Shine's obvious talents is being constrained by Bumpy's old-school methods. The proposition arrives wrapped in respect and tied with profit projections. Italian protection plus direct access to wholesale distribution networks, all in exchange for intelligence about Bumpy's operations. Shine's refusal should be immediate and absolute. Instead, he listens, calculates, and agrees to consider the opportunity. The betrayal begins with whispers that feel like business rather than treason. Route information for numbers collections presented as efficiency improvements. Collection schedules that could help avoid territorial conflicts. Details about which police captains receive payments and which precincts require careful navigation. Each piece of information feels individually harmless, puzzle pieces that only reveal their complete picture when assembled by someone with strategic vision. But numbers possess a stubborn honesty that men often lack, and Raymond the bookkeeper Foster has spent 17 years reading financial ledgers with religious devotion. By mid-March, he detects discrepancies that don't align with normal operational variance. Protection revenue drops 4% despite 3 new businesses opening on the routes. Heroin yields consistently run light by exactly the same margins across different shipments. Collection totals from certain runners don't match their historical performance despite stable neighborhood economics. Foster doesn't speculate or confront. He investigates with the thoroughness of a prosecutor building a capital case. The evidence accumulates through careful observation and quiet payments to reliable sources. Photographs of Shine entering Carmen's expensive apartment building. Bank records showing lifestyle incompatible with legitimate earnings. Witness testimony from runners who've noticed Shine's meetings with Italian associates in neutral territory. Financial spreadsheets that track every discrepancy back to routes Shine personally supervises. Foster compiles it all with clinical precision, building an irrefutable case of systematic theft and potential collaboration with Italian families. On March 20th, Foster requests a private audience and presents Bumpy with a manila folder containing months of investigative work. The evidence is comprehensive, damning, sufficient for immediate and violent action. Bumpy reads each page in complete silence, his expression revealing nothing, his hands steady as he examines photographs showing his most trusted lieutenant's betrayal in granular detail. The room fills with tension that feels like electricity before a storm. Foster, waiting for orders that will likely involve ice picks and unmarked graves. Instead, Bumpy walks to his office fireplace and feeds every page to flames that consume months of investigative work in minutes. Foster watches in confusion as irrefutable proof turns to ash, unable to understand why evidence of such complete betrayal would be destroyed rather than acted upon. When the last photograph curls and blackens, Bumpy finally speaks with the cold precision of a man conducting an experiment rather than managing betrayal. "I want to see how far he'll go," he says, his voice stripped of anger and filled with terrible curiosity. A small thief steals money. A complete traitor steals respect. Let him show me which one he is. The words hang in the air like a death sentence postponed, not pardoned. Shine has no idea that his fate is being measured not in dollars stolen, but in the depth of disrespect he's willing to display. The test has only just begun, and the final examination will determine whether Leon Shine Pettigrew dies as a thief or as something far worse in Bumpy Johnson's unforgiving mathematics of loyalty and consequence. April 1961 descends on Harlem with the weight of spring rain and gathering betrayal, the streets slick with water that reflects the neon signs of a neighborhood caught between old power and new ambition. Vincent Vinny Ice Carbone's patience, always more performance than genuine virtue, evaporates like steam from manholes. The polite conversations about partnership disappear. replaced by demands delivered in a Bronx meatpacking facility where the smell of blood never quite fades from concrete floors. Carbone no longer speaks to Shine as an equal, but addresses him as a purchased asset whose value depends entirely on continued cooperation. The intelligence gathering phase has concluded, Carbone explains while cleaning his fingernails with an ivory-handled knife. Now comes active participation or consequences that will transform Carmen Delacroix into a widow before she ever becomes a wife. The escalation arrives, wrapped in specifics that eliminate any possibility of misunderstanding. Carbone wants more than route information and collection schedules. He demands active sabotage, shipments delayed, protection payments missed, police relationships disrupted just enough to create friction between Bumpy and his network. Most dangerously, he wants a sit-down arranged between Bumpy and representatives from the Italian families, ostensibly for territorial negotiation, but actually designed as an execution disguised as diplomacy. The meeting would occur on neutral ground with limited security, creating the controlled variables that direct violence has failed to provide through 3 previous assassination attempts. Shine's moral fracture happens not through dramatic collapse, but through incremental surrender that feels like pragmatic survival. He tells himself that Bumpy's era is ending regardless, that Italian control of Harlem is inevitable, that positioning himself on the winning side represents intelligence rather than treason. The rationalization tastes like poison, but goes down easier than facing Carbone's alternative consequences. In exchange for delivering Bumpy to his death, Carbone promises control of Harlem's drug distribution under Italian protection. Percentage points that could generate wealth exceeding anything Bumpy's old-fashioned methods would permit. Shine agrees to architect the betrayal, trading 23 years of brotherhood for promises written on water. The setup operation requires precision that Shine has spent 2 decades perfecting under Bumpy's training, now perverted into systematic treachery. He manipulates schedules with subtle suggestions about which nights are safest, which routes have been running clean, which times certain police captains are less active. He provides Carbone with military-grade intelligence, the exact route Bumpy will travel, the vehicle specifications, the driver's habits, the positioning of security personnel, even blueprints of the meeting location with sight lines marked for shooters. Most crucially, he arranges for Bumpy's most loyal soldiers to be occupied with manufactured crises across Harlem during the critical window, ensuring minimal protection when the trap springs. April 18th arrives gray and ominous, the scheduled execution disguised as a 2:30 p.m. meeting at a social club on 125th Street. Carbone positions 8 shooters in surrounding buildings, angles calculated to create crossfire that would transform the location into a killing box with no escape routes. But Bumpy Johnson has survived 4 decades by reading violence in the space between normalcy and threat. At 2:17 p.m., 13 minutes before arrival, he notices details that spell ambush. A bread truck parked in violation of normal delivery patterns, a man adjusting curtains with nervous energy in a distant window, the unnatural stillness of a usually busy intersection. Without explanation, Bumpy orders his driver to change routes, a decision that saves his life by minutes. The convoy breaks from the planned path, tires screeching against wet pavement, as confused Italian shooters watch their target disappear into Harlem's maze of side streets. The ambush dissolves into failure, leaving 8 soldiers exposed in hostile territory with no target and significant risk. Bumpy returns to his office and conducts the mental arithmetic that has kept him alive through decades of warfare. The meeting was suggested by Shine. The security arrangements were modified by Shine. The timing was confirmed through Shine's coordination. The realization that betrayal originates from within his inner circle arrives not as shock, but as confirmation of suspicions already planted by Raymond Foster's burned evidence report. Shine, unaware that his role has been deduced, scrambles to cover his tracks through misdirection that feels clever but reads as desperation. He blames the leak on Detective Michael Corrigan, a corrupt police contact who has been selling information to multiple parties for years. The deflection provides temporary cover, while Bumpy's investigation continues with surgical precision. On April 22nd, Bumpy implements a trap so elegant it transforms investigation into mathematical certainty. He calls separate meetings with his 5 top lieutenants, providing each with different false information about a major heroin shipment from Marseille. Shine receives details about a Wednesday delivery at Pier 34 worth $750,000, arriving aboard a French cargo vessel named Liber. The other lieutenants receive variations, different days, different piers, different ships, different values. Every version sounds plausible. None are real. Whichever lie emerges in Italian conversations will identify the traitor with absolute precision. Shine takes the bait within 6 hours, passing his version to Carbone through Carmen's connections before sunset. He doesn't know that Bumpy is waiting, watching, documenting the exact timeline of betrayal. The trap has closed with terrifying finality, and the only question remaining is not whether Shine is guilty, but how systematic and brutal the consequences will be for a man who spent 23 years building trust only to sell it for the illusion of power he was never qualified to hold. May through October 1961 transforms Harlem into a vast laboratory where Bumpy Johnson conducts the most thorough investigation of his career, treating Leon Shine Pettigrew not as a suspected traitor, but as an ongoing experiment in human corruption. This isn't rage-driven retaliation, but forensic dismantling executed with surgical precision. Bumpy understands that destroying a lieutenant of Shine's stature requires evidence so overwhelming it eliminates not just the man's defenses, but his very reputation. Every stolen dollar will be documented. Every meeting with Italian associates will be photographed. Every lie will be cataloged with timestamps and witness testimony. When consequences arrive, they will carry the weight of absolute certainty rather than heated suspicion. The surveillance network activates across Harlem like a web sensitive to the slightest vibration. Dock workers at the piers receive extra cash to note Shine's movements near the waterfront, documenting meetings with men whose Italian surnames and expensive suits mark them as Genovese family associates. Bartenders at establishments from Midtown to the Bronx preserve details about shipment discussions and territorial negotiations that Shine believes occur in privacy. Street vendors positioned at key intersections track route changes that reveal a man living 2 incompatible lives. Information flows back to Bumpy through channels Shine doesn't even know exist, creating a documentary record measured in hundreds of small observations that collectively paint an irrefutable portrait of systematic betrayal. Financial forensics proceeds with equal thoroughness through Raymond the bookkeeper Foster's obsessive attention to numerical truth. Bank records obtained through corrupt officials at Chemical Bank reveal deposits incompatible with Shine's legitimate earnings. The $45,000 Sugar Hill apartment appears in property records under a shell company that traces back through 3 intermediaries to Shine's signature. Custom suits purchased with cash still leave paper trails through tailors who maintain customer logs. Foster constructs mathematical spreadsheets tracking every stolen dollar from source through Shine's spending, connecting the Mink stole purchase to specific collection shortfalls, gambling debts to redirected protection payments, creating irrefutable proof of 8 months of systematic theft. While evidence accumulates, Bumpy applies psychological pressure through increasingly sensitive assignments that test Shine's loyalty while providing opportunities for additional betrayal. He assigned Shine to handle fictional police payoffs involving Detective Corrigan, the same man Shine blamed for the failed April ambush. He requests opinions on expanding into non-existent Brooklyn territories, watching to see if false information reaches Italian ears. He mentions fabricated concerns about internal security, observing whether Shine defends himself too vigorously or deflects suspicion toward innocent parties. Each test is carefully calibrated, each response documented, the psychological examination as thorough as the financial forensics. October 15th brings the ultimate test, an assignment so sensitive that failure reveals complete allegiance to enemy interests. Bumpy entrusts Shine with redirecting a legitimate $200,000 heroin shipment from established buyers to a new distribution network, ostensibly to avoid police surveillance. When Shine attempts to redirect the shipment to Carbone's buyers instead of Bumpy's designated recipients, the betrayal is documented through photographs, recorded conversations, and witness testimony from the very couriers Shine believes he controls. The evidence is now complete, irrefutable, sufficient to justify consequences that will echo through Harlem's underworld for decades. With investigation concluded, Bumpy arranges the November 2nd confrontation at Wells' restaurant, ensuring complete privacy by positioning his most trusted men throughout the establishment. Meanwhile, Vincent Carbone provides Shine with final instructions designed to humiliate before negotiating. He wants Shine to deliver a specific racial slur verbatim to put the old man in his place before proposing the new arrangement that would leave Bumpy as figurehead while Shine assumes real power. November 2nd, 8:45 p.m. Shine sits in his Cadillac outside Wells' restaurant, practicing Carbone's insulting words until they sound natural rather than rehearsed. He checks his gold watch, adjusts his cream sharkskin suit, and rehearses the negotiation he believes will transform him from lieutenant to kingpin. What he doesn't know is that Bumpy's men have been watching him for hours, documenting his arrival, noting his nervous preparations, reporting every detail back to the man waiting inside with the patience of a judge about to deliver a capital sentence. Shine exits his vehicle and walks toward the restaurant, believing he's negotiating from strength, unaware he's entering judgment he cannot escape. Wells' restaurant transforms into a courtroom the moment Leon Shine Pettigrew slides into the booth opposite Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, though neither man wears robes and no jury observes their proceedings. The usual evening chatter has dissolved into whispers, conversations suspended as patrons instinctively understand that what unfolds in the corner booth will reshape Harlem through consequences discussed in hushed tones for decades. Shine carries Vincent Carbone's confidence like armor, believing he's entering negotiation from a position of strength rather than walking into a trial where verdict has already been rendered. The manila envelope resting between them weighs more than any weapon, containing 8 months of documented betrayal reduced to photographs, financial records, and witness statements compiled with prosecutorial thoroughness. Shine opens with Carbone's scripted insult, the words tasting like poison but delivered with practiced arrogance. He uses the racial slur first, sharp and deliberate, the kind of language that carries 4 centuries of humiliation in 3 syllables. Then comes the assessment that Bumpy is finished, that Harlem needs real leadership now, not some caretaker the neighborhood has outgrown. The words hang in the air like gun smoke, each syllable sealing Shine's fate more completely than any theft could accomplish. This transcends betrayal of money or territory. This represents ultimate disrespect, a black man carrying white supremacist language into a black man's presence, in a black neighborhood, at a black man's table, transforming himself from thief into something far worse in Bumpy's unforgiving mathematics of loyalty and consequence. Bumpy's response arrives stripped of anger, which makes it infinitely more terrifying than rage. He doesn't lean forward, doesn't raise his voice, doesn't slam the table. Instead, he opens the envelope with surgical precision and begins presenting evidence in chronological order, his tone resembling a coroner documenting cause of death. January 15th, $2,800 stolen for Carmen's mink stole. February routes, systematic skimming evolving from 2% to 5%. March 8th, first documented meeting with Carbone at the Bronx Social Club. April 18th, assassination setup using route information only Shine possessed. October 15th, attempted redirection of the $200,000 heroin shipment to Carbone's buyers. Each revelation arrives with supporting documentation that transforms abstract theft into concrete victimization. You inflated protection costs by 18% on 147th Street, Bumpy states, reading from Raymond Foster's meticulous ledgers. Mrs. Washington paid you $42 weekly when the standard rate was $35. She's 73 years old, Leon. She runs a laundromat, washing other people's clothes for survival money. You stole from a 73-year-old woman. The evidence includes bank deposit slips with Shine's signature, photographs of handshakes with Italian associates, recorded conversations from bartenders who documented every meeting Shine believed was private. That's your voice? Bumpy asks, forcing acknowledgement of each betrayal individually. That's you entering Carbone's establishment on March 12th? The questions aren't requests for information, but instruments of psychological dismantling, making denial impossible through accumulation of irrefutable proof. Shine realizes his secret life has been observed with documentary thoroughness for months. The confident partner vanishes, the terrified lieutenant remains, sweating through expensive sharkskin as 23 years of carefully constructed loyalty crumble into mathematical certainty. Every theft, every lie, every act of disloyalty has been catalogued with clinical precision, transforming him from trusted lieutenant into case study in systematic betrayal. Then comes the impossible choice, delivered with business proposition calm that makes its cruelty absolute. Bumpy offers Shine 48 hours to return every stolen dollar, calculated precisely at $467,000 by Foster's accounting, plus delivery of Vincent Carbone to a meeting of Bumpy's choosing. The terms are deliberately impossible. Shine doesn't have the money. It's been consumed by lifestyle inflation he cannot reverse. He cannot deliver Carbone. The Italian operates from fortified positions surrounded by soldiers who would execute Shine immediately if betrayal was suspected. Shine cycles through desperate bargaining with the frantic energy of a drowning man. First comes negotiation, suggesting partial repayment plans stretched over years. When that fails, threats emerge wrapped in Carbone's name as protection that sounds increasingly hollow. Finally comes begging, invoking their shared history from 1938, the alley where Bumpy saved his life. But Bumpy's expression reveals what Shine should have understood immediately. Mercy was exhausted the moment a racial slur crossed this table. The final instruction arrives with execution order simplicity. Warehouse 47, Pier 19. Tomorrow night, 11. Come alone. Bring everything. Shine leaves Wells at 9:47 p.m., walking into November cold with 25 hours to choose between options that all terminate at the same destination. The mathematics of survival offer only one equation: face consequences at Warehouse 47, bring whatever money can be gathered, and hope some fragment of shared history might purchase quick death rather than the prolonged suffering that systematic betrayal typically earns. November 3rd, 11 p.m., Warehouse 47 stands at the edge of Pier 19 like a monument to abandoned industry, its corrugated iron walls rattling in the wind that carries the scent of salt water and urban decay from the Harlem River below. Inside, a single naked bulb hangs from rusted chain, casting harsh yellow light onto concrete floors stained by decades of legitimate commerce that ended long before this building found its current purpose. The circle of illumination reveals Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, standing with the patience of a judge who has already written his verdict, flanked by two of Raymond the bookkeeper Foster's most trusted men, whose faces remain obscured by shadow, but whose presence communicates the finality of what will unfold in the next hour. Leon Shine Pettigrew steps into that circle of light carrying two worn leather satchels that represent 25 hours of desperate liquidation. His cream sharkskin suit, immaculate just yesterday at Wells' restaurant, now shows wrinkles that speak of sleepless panic. His Italian leather shoes scuff against concrete as he approaches the wooden crate that serves as both table and altar for this final accounting. Inside the bags lies $127,000 in cash, every dollar he could gather from safe deposit boxes, Carmen's jewelry, hidden stashes, and borrowed money without alerting Vincent Carbone to his desperation. It represents a fortune by most standards, but in this warehouse it functions merely as evidence of incomplete compliance. Shine empties the satchels without ceremony, bills tumbling onto the crate in disorganized piles that represent the complete destruction of 8 months of systematic theft. Bumpy counts with the methodical precision that built his empire, fingers moving through denominations with practiced efficiency, while the only sounds are the riffle of currency and the rhythmic lapping of water against pilings beneath the floor. The counting takes 11 minutes of absolute silence. When it concludes, Bumpy states the total without looking up from the money. $127,000, 27% of what Foster's books say you stole. His voice carries no anger, just the flat statement of mathematical fact that transforms the shortage from disappointment into confirmation of character. That tells me everything about how you measure loyalty against consequence. The judgment arrives not as passionate denunciation, but as clinical explanation of organizational necessity. Bumpy describes how betrayal from positions of ultimate trust requires consequences visible enough to serve as permanent curriculum for anyone else calculating the mathematics of disloyalty. Quick execution would satisfy personal revenge, but fail institutional requirements. What follows must be systematic, proportional, and documented through the physical evidence that Shine's body will become. This isn't murder driven by emotion, but structural maintenance, the removal of corruption through methods that reinforce rather than undermine the empire's foundation. At 11:18 p.m., the systematic punishment begins with Foster's men restraining Shine against the concrete floor. There is no frenzy of violence, no uncontrolled rage. Instead, what unfolds is methodical dismantling that connects each injury to specific betrayals cataloged over 18 months of investigation. Bumpy recites the chronology while consequences are administered with surgical precision. For the April 18th assassination setup that nearly cost Bumpy his life, Shine's right kneecap shatters under iron bar impact, the sound echoing through the warehouse like a gunshot. The left kneecap follows for the October heroin redirection that attempted to steal $200,000 in a single transaction. The finger breaking proceeds with equal systematicity, each snap representing specific thefts documented in Foster's ledgers. The mink stole purchase, the Sugar Hill apartment, the custom Italian suits, the gambling debts paid with stolen protection money. Between injuries, Bumpy forces acknowledgement of each betrayal, requiring verbal confirmation that connects punishment to specific crimes. The meeting with Carbone on March 8th, he states, waiting for Shine's gasped admission before the next consequence arrives. The psychological torture exceeds physical pain, forcing Shine to participate in his own destruction through confession that strips away even the dignity of silent suffering. When structural damage is complete and Shine exists in a state between consciousness and shock, Bumpy produces a piece of cream stationery, the kind used for legitimate business correspondence. He writes 5 words in careful block letters: "Betrayal has no right hand." The note is pinned inside Shine's jacket with methodical care, positioned over the heart that beat with disloyalty for 18 months. This transforms Shine from individual tragedy into organizational communication, a message written in flesh and delivered through currents that will carry it to exactly the right audience. The disposal follows protocols refined through decades of necessity and mathematical precision. Shine's body, still breathing but shattered beyond repair, is weighted with chains calculated to keep it submerged for exactly the duration required by decomposition and current patterns. The location of submersion is chosen with equal care. Positioned where the Harlem River's flow will carry the body to a discovery point that maximizes visibility while minimizing investigative traction. At 11:47 p.m., dark water accepts its burden with barely a splash, ripples spreading outward before vanishing into current that has swallowed countless secrets and will deliver this one according to schedule. November 4th, 7:43 a.m., sanitation worker Marcus Webb spots the body caught against Pier 34's pilings during his regular route. Bloated and damaged, but unmistakably human and deliberately positioned for discovery. Police arrive within 20 minutes. Detectives who recognize immediately that this isn't random violence, but organizational message delivered with precision timing. They canvass the waterfront systematically, interview dock workers, bartenders, and street vendors, encountering the wall of silence that greets investigations into Bumpy Johnson's business operations. No witnesses emerge from 43 interviews. No evidence surfaces beyond the body itself and the note pinned inside the jacket. The case file grows thick with documentation of thorough investigation that produces zero actionable intelligence. The message transmits through Harlem with telegraph speed, carried by whispers that travel faster than police reports. Leon Shine Pettigrew, 23 years of loyal service, destroyed completely for 18 months of systematic betrayal. The mathematics are clear, the lesson permanent, the consequences so complete they become legend. Bumpy Johnson's justice operates with systematic precision that makes examples rather than merely eliminating problems, creating warnings written in water and remembered in whispers that will echo through Harlem's underworld for generations, ensuring that the next man who considers betrayal understands exactly what such calculations cost when the final accounting comes due. November 1961 transforms Harlem's criminal landscape through seismic waves that radiate outward from Warehouse 47, reshaping every calculation about loyalty, ambition, and survival under Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson's systematic rule. The discovery of Leon Shine Pettigrew's body functions as organizational reset, a brutal recalibration that forces every lieutenant, courier, and street soldier to conduct immediate self-audit of their past 18 months. Within 72 hours, 3 separate skimming operations cease without explanation, their architects suddenly discovering religion or legitimate employment rather than testing whether Bumpy's justice extends beyond his inner circle. The message transmits with surgical clarity through barbershops, pool halls, and street corners. Proximity to power provides no immunity when betrayal is proven through evidence rather than suspected through paranoia. Vincent "Vinny Ice" Carbone's response follows predictable emotional progression that reveals the mathematical precision behind Bumpy's strategy. Initially, rage dominates. Carbone storms through his Bronx headquarters, smashing glass, threatening retaliation, promising that Shine's death will trigger Italian response, leaving Harlem burning. But rage requires commitment that evaporates when his superiors conduct cost-benefit analysis and conclude that war with Bumpy Johnson over a failed asset represents terrible business mathematics. Fear arrives when Carbone realizes Shine's systematic dismantling was documented through photographs delivered anonymously to his social club, images showing exactly what happens to men who attempt manipulating Bumpy's organization from outside. By December, strategic withdrawal becomes inevitable. Italian operations retreat from direct Harlem engagement, accepting territorial boundaries that will hold for 8 years through mutual understanding that some neighborhoods are governed by codes older and more brutal than mafia tradition. The community impact reveals Bumpy's sophisticated understanding that justice requires balance between punishment and restoration, between fear and respect. While Shine's body serves as public warning, the stolen money returns quietly through methods that obscure their origin but demonstrate systematic care for those victimized by betrayal. Families who paid inflated protection costs discover mysterious refunds calculated with accounting precision. Business owners who suffered Shine skimming receive anonymous envelopes containing exact amounts stolen plus interest. Most significantly, when Shine's mother dies 3 months later, never learning the truth about her son's fate, Bumpy pays for funeral services that exceed anything her modest savings could afford. She's buried with dignity that her son's betrayal attempted to purchase through theft rather than earn through legitimate means. A final act of mercy from the man who ordered his execution. New protocols emerge from betrayal's ashes, hardening organizational structure against future fractures through lessons written in blood and implemented with bureaucratic thoroughness. Raymond the bookkeeper Foster implements triple verification accounting systems where no single lieutenant controls unmonitored revenue streams. Loyalty tests become routine rather than exceptional, with false information deliberately seeded to identify potential leaks before they metastasize into systematic treachery. Financial oversight intensifies through weekly audits replacing monthly reviews, with independent verification required for any transaction exceeding $5,000. Most crucially, the unspoken understanding crystallizes into organizational gospel. Betrayal discovered through evidence rather than suspected through paranoia will be answered with consequences so complete they serve as permanent curriculum for anyone calculating the mathematics of disloyalty. The legend grows through repetition that transforms documented history into mythological warning, spreading through the underworld with embellishments that make truth more terrible with each retelling. In pool halls and barbershops, men whisper about the warehouse, about the breaking of fingers, about the silence of the river. Some versions claim Shine was alive when he hit the water, others insist Bumpy wept while delivering judgment. The variations matter less than the consistent core message. Leon Shine Pettigrew, 23 years of trusted service, destroyed absolutely for 18 months of systematic disloyalty, his body delivered to the Harlem River as communication that will echo through decades of criminal enterprise. The story serves as permanent deterrent, a ghost story told to ambitious young criminals explaining why certain lines must never be crossed, why patience is safer than greed, why Bumpy Johnson's eyes see everything even when they appear closed. Historically, Shine's elimination solidifies Bumpy's reputation as undisputed sovereign of Harlem, a title held not merely through force, but through intellectual dismantling of threats both foreign and domestic. It establishes codes of conduct that govern Harlem's criminal enterprises long after Bumpy's death. Frameworks where order supersedes chaos and consequences are as reliable as sunrise. The incident proves Bumpy operates not as desperate gangster, but as strategic ruler protecting his territory against invasion and treason, willing to execute his closest friend to preserve the integrity of empire built on reputation rather than legal contracts. Summer 1965. 4 years removed from the night at Warehouse 47, Bumpy Johnson sits in his office overlooking Lenox Avenue, still living in shadows cast by choices that have no right answers. A young soldier named Marcus Webb, ambitious and intelligent, asks the question every generation must learn to answer: Mr. Johnson, how do you know who to trust? Bumpy lights a Cuban cigar with deliberate slowness, the kind that costs more than most men earn weekly, taking time with preparation rituals that have become meditation on power's true costs. He walks to the window and looks out over Harlem, watching the neighborhood move through evening rhythms with efficiency of machinery he spent decades building and maintaining through methods mixing brutality with strategic vision. The streets below pulse with life he protects and controls, a kingdom where loyalty represents the only currency that cannot be stolen, only surrendered. Loyalty isn't about fear, he says finally, smoke curling upward in amber light, his voice carrying weight that transcends simplicity. Fear fades, money comes and goes, territory shifts. Loyalty is about understanding that some things are more valuable than money, more permanent than power. Leon Shine forgot that when he sold respect for promises written on water. The river remembers everything we choose to forget. The words hang in air like benediction and warning, carrying inheritance forged through consequences so brutal they became legend. Marcus nods with solemnity of student receiving sacred text, understanding he's been given not just answer, but code that will govern his survival in world where betrayal equals death and loyalty equals life. The Harlem River flows past the city with patient indifference, its dark water carrying secrets that will never surface and memories that shape the living through their weight. Somewhere in that current rests physical evidence of what happens when loyalty is traded for ambition, when respect is sold for Italian promises. The river remembers Leon Shine Pettigrew not as trusted lieutenant he was for 23 years, but as cautionary tale he became through 18 months of systematic betrayal. It remembers the sound of chains dragging weighted body into depths that swallow mistakes and deliver warnings according to currents older than the city itself. And in that remembering, in whispered stories that travel through Harlem's underworld like prayers the legend persists, Bumpy Johnson's justice is swift, systematic, and absolute, measured not in anger, but in consequences so complete they transform individual tragedy into permanent curriculum for anyone calculating the true cost of betrayal in a world where some things remain more valuable than money, more permanent than power, more final than the dark water that remembers everything men choose to forget.